is making a really good point. Deirdre wrote in the chat window that police is part of professional behaviour, especially in health, so maybe context related. Absolutely, Deirdre. There may be some justification for what appears to be non-academic criteria to be actually academic criteria, but only if the learning objectives mentioned etiquette or participation. And what I'm going to say in my findings was that when you looked at learning objectives, they almost never had anything about etiquette or politeness or participation. But nonetheless, criteria relating to those skills routinely appeared in the rubrics. So absolutely, they may be valid if they reflect the learning objectives. Paul, I completely agree, Paul. Paul has written, on a couple of occasions I've had questionable posts. I guess they can be penalised by being ignored. Absolutely, that's the way they should be dealt with. Or maybe the student, told, would you, be more supportive? But they should not form part of the rubric because they are not academic achievements. Some really interesting comments in the chat window, but I'm going to move on.
Yeah, that's fine, Bobby. Please keep going.
Okay, here's some excerpts from the paper. I'm sorry for it being so text heavy. I won't read through it. I'll let you have a look now. So please spend the next 30 seconds or so having a look at those bullet points, and feel free to ask or make comments if there's anything there you want to comment on.
Sorry if it's okay, I'll just make a comment here, Bobby, as well. I think one of the issues is to separate the purposes of some of these online discussions as well, or the online things, because often some people use them simply for social interaction as opposed to academic discourse. And I know that obviously if there's a rubric associated with it, you'd expect it to have some content and therefore some academic discourse that might be associated with that. But I think sometimes the issues of the social interactions and the actual content learning or the skill development often gets blurred with some of those things, because people often think that an online discussion is a good way just to get students together to socialize in some way, and then assuming that some learning will take place during the socialization.
Absolutely, Jeff. The formative uses of online writing and online forums are huge, but these 20 rubrics, Jeff, were all used for summative assessment.
Yeah, and I think that brings up the interesting question about the role of socialization and social networking, when it does come to summative assessment. I think obviously in some disciplines that's going to be very important because it's actually part of the skills that the students need to develop. But in others, I guess you could always say, that it might be marginal to some of the core content and some of the core skills and capabilities.
Yeah. Okay, this slide takes two particular case studies. So these were two of the 20 rubrics that I analysed, and I've picked them out because Rovai and Hazare are particularly well known in the field of assessing online forums, particularly Rovi. As far as I can gather, his rubric is probably the most commonly used one that I came across. And it's a very good rubric. I'm not trying to criticise anyone, but if you look at my analysis of Rovi's rubric, you can see why Roy Sadler would certainly be perturbed. So I'll let you look at the analysis of Rovi's rubric. Royce would argue that that has very low fidelity. 4 out of 14 criteria that Rovi is proposing relate to academic standards, and 10 he would argue are contaminants. Rovi's rubric was littered with words like caring and compassionate and rude, which fine for formative learning and formative assessment, very questionable that they should form part of a summative assessment. Hazari is also well known in the rubric field. He has a rubric with 20 criteria. He does a wee bit better than Rovi, with 10 criteria relating to academic achievements and 10 contaminants, as Sadler would say. I think the final example, I've got the final bullet point in that slide. It wasn't atypical. I think it's a fairly, interesting, invalid criterion. But I came across lots of criteria like that, so I'll let you read that one. It's the final bullet point in the slide. Some criteria were crude. And you can see how Hazari is trying to gauge the prior reading of learners. But my goodness, what a crude way of doing that. I'm afraid that was not untypical at all. I came across lots and lots of really crude criteria, like the time between posting, like 3 posts per week without any reference to their relevance or quality, like the number of words, the average number of words in a post would get more marks than, a smaller post. Okay, so to conclude my findings, I found that the majority of rubrics for assessing online discussions exhibit low fidelity, that none took account of the student's final level of understanding, none at all. They were all continuously assessed. And remember Royce's criticism of continuous assessment.